The dishwater scalded Liam O'Connell's cracked hands as he scrubbed crystal glasses at Meridian, steam rising from the industrial sink, while Manhattan's elite discussed million-dollar deals over wine that cost more than his rent. 3 years of this work had taught him invisibility, move quietly, collect tips, go home to Finn. The man in Italian leather shoes appeared beside his station without warning, close enough that expensive cologne cut through kitchen grease and desperation. "You're the one with the son who builds telescopes." Not a question. A statement delivered with casual authority that made nearby conversations pause. Liam's hand stilled in soapy water. Strangers who knew about Finn meant trouble. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "Bright boy. Shame about that scholarship waiting list." The cream envelope landed on the steel counter, thick paper whispering of old money and darker secrets. "My sister-in-law needs a companion tomorrow evening. Charity gala. She's been unwell since her accident. $2,000. Liam could see the bills through the envelope's edge. Finn's winter coat, school lunches for 2 months, maybe the science camp application fee sitting on their kitchen table like an accusation. What kind of companion? She's in a wheelchair. Brilliant woman, but people treat her like broken china now. One evening of normal conversation. Help her remember what human feels like. The stranger's winter-sharp smile made Liam's stomach clench. Men in $1,000 suits didn't hand out charity to dishwashers without expecting something in return. If you've ever felt your world shift when opportunity wore a predator's face, you know why Liam's fingers trembled reaching for that envelope. By tomorrow, he'd discover the woman in the wheelchair saw everything, including the trap they were both walking into. 24 hours later, Serena Ward sat in her wheelchair before the antique mirror in her bedroom, watching her stylist apply foundation that couldn't hide the exhaustion carved into her features. Her hands trembled against the wheelchair's armrests, not from nerves, but from whatever cocktail of medications Alistair insisted were keeping her stable. The navy silk gown hung loose on her frame, tailored for a woman who used to command boardrooms with her presence rather than observe them from the confines of expensive upholstery. Every morning brought the same routine: pills with breakfast, weakness by noon, fog settling over her mind like a thick blanket just when clarity mattered most. "You look beautiful, Miss Ward," the stylist murmured, her voice carrying the careful gentleness people used around the terminally fragile. "The color brings out your eyes." Serena caught her own gaze in the mirror. Dark eyes that had once dissected hostile takeovers and billion-dollar acquisitions now dulled by pharmaceutical haze. 6 months ago, she'd been negotiating the largest tech merger in her company's history. Now she needed help getting dressed for what amounted to a public humiliation orchestrated by her dead sister's husband. Alistair's reflection appeared behind hers, his presence filling the room like expensive smoke. "Ready for your evening out? Your escort should arrive soon." "You mean the man you hired to make me look pathetic?" The words came out sharper than intended, cutting through the medication's cotton wool effect on her thoughts. "I hired someone to help you feel human again. The board meeting is Monday, Serena. They need to see you engaging socially, making rational decisions. This evening could help your case." His tone carried that familiar mixture of false concern and barely concealed satisfaction. She wanted to stand, to tower over him the way she used to when closing deals worth more than most countries' GDP. Instead, her legs felt like lead weights, unresponsive and foreign. The evening medication always hit hardest, turning her razor-sharp mind into something soft and useless. "And if I refuse this theater? Then you spend another evening alone with quarterly reports while the board questions whether Ward Industries needs leadership that can actually engage with the world." He paused, letting the threat settle. Is that really what Sarah would have wanted for the company she helped you build? The mention of her sister hit like a physical blow. Sarah, who'd believed in second chances and the power of human connection. Sarah, who'd married Alistair thinking she was choosing love over her family's business instincts. Sarah, who'd died before seeing how her husband planned to harvest everything she'd left behind. Across the city, Liam knelt on their apartment's thin carpet, helping 8-year-old Finn with the astronomy homework that consistently earned the boy straight A's, despite attending a school where science textbooks predated the moon landing. "Dad, why are you wearing the fancy clothes?" Finn looked up from his drawing of Jupiter's moons, pencil smudged across his cheek, in a way that made Liam's chest ache with protective love. Sometimes helping people means doing things that feel uncomfortable. Liam adjusted his son's collar, noting how the school uniform was getting too small again, another expense he couldn't afford. Like when you help the sick people at the clinic. Finn's questions always cut straight to truth with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Liam's hand stilled. His volunteer work at the free clinic was supposed to be invisible to Finn, a way of keeping his medical training sharp without explaining why he'd walked away from his residency at Mount Sinai after Emma died. How do you tell an 8-year-old that his aunt's misdiagnosis had shattered your faith in the system you'd spent 6 years learning to navigate? Something like that, buddy. But you're not a doctor anymore. The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from an old fire. Liam had never told Finn the complete story, how he'd been 12 hours into a 36-hour shift when he missed Emma's symptoms, how overwork and exhaustion had turned his brilliant sister into a statistic, how he'd traded his stethoscope for a dish rag rather than risk destroying another family. I'm still the same person, just different work now. Finn studied him with the intensity that made teachers call him gifted and other kids call him weird. Will the lady be nice to you? I hope so. What if she's mean because she's sad about being sick? 8 years old, and Finn understood human nature better than most adults Liam served at Meridian. He pulled his son close, breathing in the familiar scent of childhood. Grape juice, playground chalk, innocence that wouldn't last forever. Then we try to help her feel less sad. Even if she's not nice at first? Especially then. The rented tuxedo hung on their bedroom door like a costume for a play he'd never auditioned for. Liam had spent 2 hours at the rental shop, enduring the clerk's barely concealed amusement as he explained his budget constraints. The bow tie felt like a noose, and the patent leather shoes pinched his feet. But Finn's tuition payment was due Tuesday, and the scholarship committee would announce their decision next Friday. The Ward mansion rose from Central Park West like something carved from old money and older secrets, limestone and leaded glass reflecting the city lights in patterns that spoke of power accumulated across generations. Liam stood at the service entrance. Alistair had been specific about which door was appropriate for hired help, checking his appearance one final time in the reflection of a black sedan's window. The butler who answered wore more expensive clothing than Liam owned, his expression perfectly neutral as he led the way through hallways lined with oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. The marble floors had been polished to mirror brightness, reflecting crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow fragments across walls that had witnessed decades of financial empire building. "Mr. Thorne is waiting in the library," the butler announced, his voice carrying the kind of professional discretion that came with years of pretending not to notice family dysfunction. The library smelled of leather bindings and old cigars, its floor-to-ceiling shelves creating the atmosphere of serious money, seriously managed. Alistair stood beside a fireplace large enough to roast a pig, swirling brandy and crystal that caught the light like trapped amber. Punctual, excellent. He didn't offer to shake hands or invite Liam to sit. "Let me be clear about this evening's expectations. Serena has been fragile since her accident. The medications affect her judgment, sometimes cause confusion or inappropriate remarks. Your job is to be pleasant, helpful, and discreet about anything unusual you might observe." Something in Alistair's tone triggered Liam's medical instincts. The careful way he emphasized Serena's supposed instability, laying groundwork for dismissing anything she might say or do. It reminded him of family members who described psychiatric symptoms to justify decisions the patient never agreed to. Unusual how? Emotional outbursts, poor decision-making, saying things that don't make sense. The accident damaged more than just her spine. Alistair's smile was surgical in its precision. Just be patient with her. Remember, this is therapeutic. Don't take anything she says too seriously. The warning felt like a script, rehearsed and delivered with the confidence of someone who expected to be believed without question. Liam had heard similar speeches in hospital hallways, relatives preparing staff to dismiss a patient's complaints before they could be voiced. "She's waiting in the garden room. Try not to stare at the wheelchair. She's sensitive about appearing helpless." Liam followed him through corridors designed to make visitors feel small, past windows that framed Central Park like living art. The garden room glowed with late afternoon light, filtering through glass walls that showcased a private conservatory where orchids bloomed in defiance of the November cold outside. Serena Ward sat silhouetted against the windows, her wheelchair positioned to catch the golden light that made her dark hair shine like polished obsidian. Even from across the room, Liam could see the intelligence in her eyes. Sharp, assessing, alert. This wasn't the confused, fragile woman Alistair had described. "Serena, your companion for the evening. Mr. O'Connell comes highly recommended." Alistair's voice carried satisfied smugness, as if he were presenting a particularly clever solution to a difficult problem. Recommended by whom? She didn't look at Alistair, keeping her attention fixed on Liam with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. The catering service, very reliable. The emphasis on reliable made clear what Liam was. Purchased discretion, bought silence, rented companionship that could be dismissed when no longer useful. Serena's eyes met his for the first time, and he saw something that made his chest tighten with recognition, the look of someone drowning in plain sight, while everyone around them insisted the water was perfectly safe. "I'm sorry they dragged you into this," she said quietly, her words meant for him alone. Her whispered apology changed everything. This wasn't a woman lost in medication-induced confusion. This was someone who understood exactly what was happening, who recognized a fellow victim in whatever elaborate game Alistair was orchestrating. "It's fine, Miss Ward. Shall we go?" "Please, call me Serena. We're apparently going to spend the evening pretending this is normal." Her voice carried dry humor that cut through the mansion's oppressive formality like sunlight through storm clouds. As Liam moved behind her wheelchair, Serena reached back and touched his wrist. Just for a moment. Just enough pressure to let him know that whatever happened tonight, they were no longer facing it alone. For the first time in months, someone had looked at her like she was more than the sum of her limitations. And for the first time since Emma's death, Liam felt his dormant medical instincts stirring, recognizing something wrong that might still be fixed. The limousine glided through Manhattan traffic like a shark through dark water, its tinted windows creating a private world where Serena and Liam sat in careful silence. The leather seats still held the scent of expensive perfume from previous passengers, mixing with the faint chemical smell that seemed to follow Serena everywhere. Not quite medicine, not quite illness, but something artificial that made Liam's medical training whisper warnings he couldn't yet name. "You should know what you've walked into," Serena said finally, her voice cutting through the soft hum of the engine. The medication fog seemed lighter tonight, as if the act of leaving the mansion had sharpened her focus. This evening isn't about charity or companionship, it's evidence gathering. Liam turned to study her profile, noting the way her jaw tightened when she spoke about Alistair's plans. Evidence of what? My incompetence, poor judgment. The board meets Monday to discuss my fitness to continue as CEO. Tonight's performance will be Exhibit A in Alistair's argument that I'm too damaged to run a $3 billion company. Her fingers moved restlessly against the wheelchair's armrest, the only sign of the fury she kept carefully contained. He's betting that a publicly desperate woman hiring companionship will look pathetic enough to tip the vote. The city lights streaked past the windows, each one representing lives that would never intersect with theirs. People whose biggest worry tonight was which restaurant to choose or whether to take a cab home. Liam felt the familiar weight of being pulled into someone else's crisis, the same sensation that had once made him choose emergency medicine over safer specialties. What happens if he succeeds? Alistair becomes interim CEO while I receive the kind of long-term care that conveniently keeps me away from board meetings. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. My sister's company becomes his company, and I become a cautionary tale about what happens when women try to build empires. The Waldorf rose before them like a monument to old New York power, its Art Deco facade glowing under lights that had witnessed decades of deals that shaped the city's financial landscape. Valets moved with practiced efficiency, opening doors for guests whose jewelry cost more than most people's cars, whose casual conversations involved the kind of money that could fund small countries. "There's still time to leave," Serena said as the valet approached their door. "Whatever he's paying you isn't worth becoming part of this circus." But Liam was already moving, stepping out to take control of her wheelchair before the valet could assume the task. The November air bit through his rented tuxedo, carrying the scent of expensive cigars and the kind of desperation that dressed itself in designer gowns. "We'll give them a show worth watching," he said quietly, positioning himself behind her chair. "But not the one they're expecting." The Waldorf's lobby buzzed with the particular energy of Manhattan's elite gathering to congratulate themselves on their generosity, the kind of charity event where million-dollar checks were written to solve problems that would never touch the writers' lives. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over faces Liam recognized from business magazines, people who moved markets with phone calls and toppled governments with investment decisions. The whispers started before they cleared the entrance. "Isn't that Serena Ward? I heard she was in some kind of accident." "Poor thing. Look at her. She's hired an escort." "How desperate." Alistair must be beside himself. The family reputation, you know. Liam felt Serena's shoulders tense under the weight of their attention, saw her hands grip the wheelchair's armrests until her knuckles went white. This was the moment Alistair had orchestrated. The brilliant CEO reduced to public spectacle, her condition and her choices open for examination by people who measured worth in stock prices and quarterly returns. Instead of shrinking from the scrutiny, Liam leaned forward slightly, his voice warm and conversational. The Rothschild acquisition was brilliant, by the way. Buying their debt at discount and converting it to equity stake gave you control without triggering their poison pill provisions. Serena's surprise was genuine. Most people at these events knew her as Sarah's sister or Alistair's burden, not as the architect of some of the decade's most complex corporate strategies. You follow financial news? When you're washing dishes where millionaires eat, you learn to listen. He guided her wheelchair through the crowd with steady confidence, noting how conversations paused as they passed. The biotech merger last spring was even more impressive. Converting the European regulatory delay into acquisition leverage, that took vision. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere as nearby guests registered the intelligence in their conversation. This wasn't a broken woman clinging to hired comfort. This was a business strategist discussing complex deals with someone who actually understood the mechanics involved. By the time they reached the ballroom, Serena was sitting straighter, her voice gaining strength as she explained the regulatory challenges that had made the biotech deal nearly impossible. Liam found himself genuinely fascinated by the way her mind worked, how she could see patterns in market chaos that others missed entirely. The Swiss regulatory approval was the key, she was saying, her eyes bright with the kind of intellectual engagement that had built her empire. Everyone focused on the FDA timeline, but Geneva was always going to be the bottleneck. The guests who'd been prepared to witness her humiliation found themselves listening to a masterclass in international finance delivered by a woman who clearly remained sharp despite her physical limitations. The whispers changed tenor, speculation replacing pity, as people remembered why Serena Ward's name appeared on Fortune's most powerful women lists. Alistair appeared beside their table during the second course, his smile tight with barely controlled irritation. The evening was not proceeding according to his script. "Serena, you seem energetic tonight. I hope you're not overexerting yourself." His concern sounded practiced, delivered with the kind of patronizing care that made surrounding diners lean in to catch family drama disguised as medical attention. "I feel clearer than I have in months," she replied, her voice carrying just enough volume to reach nearby tables. "It's amazing what good conversation can do for mental fog." Alistair's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell that Liam filed away for future reference. Whatever medication was causing Serena's usual evening confusion wasn't working tonight, and Alistair was calculating how to adjust his strategy. "Perhaps we should discuss your medication schedule when we get home. Dr. Harrison mentioned some adjustments might be necessary." The threat was subtle but clear. Step out of line, and the chemical fog would thicken until she could barely remember her own name. Liam felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched the exchange. He'd seen this dynamic before in hospital rooms where family members used medical authority to control patients' choices, where concern masked manipulation so smoothly that even trained professionals sometimes missed the signs. "I think the current schedule is working perfectly," Serena said, her hand finding Liam's wrist under the tablecloth. Her touch was steady now, no longer trembling with medication-induced weakness. "Don't you think so, Liam?" The use of his first name in front of Alistair was deliberate, a small rebellion that shifted the power dynamic at their small table. For the first time since arriving, Liam saw genuine fear flicker across Alistair's controlled expression. The man who'd hired him to document Serena's incompetence was beginning to realize that his carefully constructed trap might be catching the wrong victim. The ballroom's orchestra played Vivaldi as servers moved between tables laden with flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But Serena's attention was fixed on the strange clarity flooding her mind. For weeks, evenings had meant the familiar slide into pharmaceutical fog, thoughts becoming thick and slow until she could barely follow simple conversations. Tonight felt different, sharp, electric, as if someone had adjusted the focus on a blurry photograph. Liam watched her carefully from across the table, noting the way her pupils remained normal-sized despite what should have been peak medication hours. Her coordination during dinner had been steady, none of the trembling or confusion Alistair had warned him to expect. Either her condition was far less severe than described, or something was very wrong with her treatment. The neurological symptoms started after the accident, she was explaining quietly, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd learned to doubt her own perceptions. First the paralysis, then the cognitive issues. Dr. Harrison says the spine trauma affected my brain chemistry. How long between the accident and when the confusion started? The question came out before Liam could stop himself, medical training overriding social politeness. Serena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. 3 weeks. Maybe a month. Why? That's unusual. He caught himself before saying more, but her eyes had already sharpened with the first real hope he'd seen all evening. Unusual how? Before Liam could answer, Alistair materialized beside their table, like expensive smoke, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere around them. Several nearby diners glanced over with the keen interest of people who sensed family drama brewing beneath the charity gala's polished surface. "Serena, I need a word." His voice carried the kind of authority that had been crushing her spirit for months, but tonight it seemed to bounce off her like water off stone. Privately, "I'm perfectly comfortable here, thank you." She didn't look up from her plate, but Liam could see her hands tighten almost imperceptibly around her silverware. "Your medication can wait until we get home." The steel in her voice surprised everyone at the table, including herself. "I'm having an interesting conversation about spinal trauma recovery. Did you know that cognitive symptoms appearing weeks after the initial injury often indicate secondary complications rather than primary damage?" Alistair's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I think you're overanalyzing things. Dr. Harrison has been very clear about your condition." "Has he?" Serena's gaze found Liam's across the table. "What did you say you used to do before the restaurant work?" The question hung in the air between them like a lit fuse. Liam felt the weight of Alistair's attention, calculating and dangerous. Whatever game they were playing, the stakes had just jumped considerably higher. "I studied medicine," he said carefully, "before life took a different direction." Alistair's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression that revealed panic being forcibly contained. "How interesting. Though I'm sure you understand that discussing a patient's condition without proper credentials or knowledge of their case history would be inappropriate." The threat was delivered with surgical precision, wrapped in reasonable concern that would sound perfectly logical to anyone not listening for the sharp edge underneath. Liam recognized the technique from his hospital days. Family members who used medical terminology to shut down conversations they couldn't control. "Of course," Liam replied, but his eyes remained locked on Serena's, though asking questions about recovery timelines is hardly diagnosing anything. The orchestra launched into Mozart as the ballroom filled with the gentle buzz of New York's elite discussing tax-deductible generosity, but their table had become an island of tension in the sea of casual wealth. Serena's mind was working with a clarity she hadn't experienced in months, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving suddenly clicking into place. "You know what's fascinating," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to reach the neighboring tables. "I've been taking the same medication regimen for 6 months, but my symptoms seem to fluctuate based on factors that have nothing to do with my injury, almost like they're being influenced by external variables." Alistair's brandy glass froze halfway to his lips. "The human brain is complex, Serena. Recovery isn't always linear." "No, but patterns usually are." She looked directly at Liam. If someone were experiencing medication-induced cognitive impairment, would the effects be consistent with daily dosing, or would they vary based on the specific compounds being administered? The question was brilliant in its simplicity, clinical enough to sound like curiosity, specific enough to reveal that her mind was far sharper than anyone had been led to believe. Liam found himself genuinely impressed by the way she'd maneuvered the conversation into dangerous territory while maintaining plausible deniability. Consistency would be expected with properly prescribed medications, he said carefully. Variation might suggest either dosage irregularities or the presence of additional compounds not accounted for in the treatment plan. The temperature at their table seemed to drop several degrees. Alistair set his glass down with the precise control of a man fighting to maintain composure, his smile becoming something carved from ice and malice. "I think this conversation has become inappropriately clinical for a social event," he said, his voice carrying enough volume to draw concerned glances from nearby guests. "Serena, you know how these episodes affect your judgment. Perhaps it's time for me to ask Dr. Harrison for a second opinion," she interrupted, her words clear and strong. "Independent blood work might be illuminating." The words hit Alistair like physical blows. His careful mask slipped just enough for Liam to see the calculation behind his eyes. The rapid assessment of risks and countermeasures that confirmed every suspicion that had been building throughout the evening. "That won't be necessary," Alistair said quickly. "Your current care is perfectly adequate." "I'm sure it is, but as CEO, I've learned that independent verification is always wise when dealing with complex systems." Serena's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "After all, we wouldn't want anyone to think that my medical care was being influenced by parties with conflicting interests." The accusation hung between them like a live wire, electrically dangerous and impossible to ignore. Around their table, conversations had quieted as other diners sensed the family drama brewing beneath the evening's charitable facade. Alistair's phone buzzed against the table, the sound unnaturally loud in their bubble of tension. He glanced at the screen, and whatever he saw there made his face go gray beneath his expensive tan. "We need to leave. Now." His voice carried new urgency, the kind of panic that came from plans unraveling in real time. "There's been a development with the board meeting. They've moved it to tomorrow morning." Serena's hand found Liam's wrist under the tablecloth, her grip surprisingly strong for someone supposedly battling neurological weakness. "How convenient. Just enough time to adjust my medication schedule before I have to perform for the directors." Alistair was already standing, his movements sharp with barely controlled desperation. "The car is waiting outside." But as they prepared to leave, Liam caught sight of Alistair's phone screen. Not a message about board meetings, but a text from someone named Dr. Harrison with just 3 words: "Blood work ordered." The trap that had been closing around Serena for months was about to snap shut, and they had less than 12 hours to prove that the woman in the wheelchair wasn't the broken one in this story. The mansion felt like a mausoleum when they returned, all marble silence and shadows that seemed to press against Serena's wheelchair as Alistair escorted them through halls lined with portraits of dead relatives who'd built empires with cleaner hands. The clarity that had sustained her through dinner was holding, each breath bringing sharper focus instead of the familiar evening descent into pharmaceutical twilight. "Your medication is waiting upstairs," Alistair said, his voice carrying the forced casualness of a man trying to regain control of a situation spinning beyond his grasp. Dr. Harrison adjusted the dosage, something about metabolic changes affecting absorption rates. Serena's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests until her knuckles went white. 6 months of accepting his explanations, trusting his concern, letting him guide her medical decisions, while her mind slowly dissolved into confusion and fog. Tonight, for the first time, she could see the pattern clearly, how the timing of her symptoms always aligned perfectly with Alistair's needs. "I think I'll skip tonight's dose," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "See how I feel without it." "That's not advisable. Your brain chemistry requires consistent medication levels to maintain stability." Alistair's tone carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to medical compliance, masquerading as family concern. Dr. Harrison was very specific about the risks of interruption. Liam stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Serena and the staircase that led to her pharmaceutical prison. His movement was subtle but deliberate, the protective instinct of someone who'd spent years in emergency rooms recognizing when patients needed an advocate more than they needed treatment. "What specific risks?" The question came out sharper than Liam intended, medical training overriding social politeness. "Cognitive clarity doesn't typically require chemical suppression." Alistair's smile became surgical in its precision. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. O'Connell, but Serena's care requires expertise that extends beyond whatever limited medical exposure you might have had. Perhaps it's time for you to collect your payment and return to your regular duties." The dismissal was delivered with the casual cruelty of a man accustomed to purchasing silence along with services, but something in Liam's expression made Alistair's confidence waver. This wasn't the compliant hired help he'd expected to manipulate. "My limited exposure included 3 years of neuropharmacology at Mount Sinai," Liam said quietly, "enough to recognize when someone's symptoms don't match their supposed diagnosis." The words fell into the mansion's silence like stones into deep water, rippling outward with implications that made Alistair's practiced composure crack at the edges. Serena felt her heart rate spike, not from medication this time, but from hope cutting through months of manufactured helplessness. "You're a doctor?" Her voice carried wonder mixed with the kind of desperate relief that came from finally finding someone who might understand what was happening to her. Before I decided emergency medicine required more faith in institutions than I could manage." Liam's eyes never left Alistair's face, watching for the tells that would confirm what his medical instincts were screaming. "But pharmacological manipulation doesn't require active credentials to recognize." Alistair's phone buzzed against his jacket pocket, the sound unnaturally loud in their triangle of tension. He glanced at the screen, and whatever he saw there made his face go ashen beneath his expensive tan. "Serena needs her medication, now." The authority had drained from his voice, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like panic. "Dr. Harrison is very concerned about potential seizure activity if her levels drop too quickly." But Serena was already moving, her hands finding the wheelchair's controls with steady precision that made mockery of months of supposed motor impairment. "I think I'll take my chances with independent medical advice." She guided her chair toward the library, leaving Alistair standing in the foyer like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Liam followed, noting how her movements were growing stronger and more coordinated with each hour that passed without chemical intervention. The library's medical textbooks had gathered dust since Sarah's death, but Serena pulled them down with hands that barely trembled, her mind cutting through pharmaceutical fog to focus with laser precision on the words that might save her life. Liam sat beside her wheelchair, reading passages aloud while she cross-referenced symptoms against medication side effects. Prolonged benzodiazepine exposure can cause cognitive impairment, motor dysfunction, and emotional lability. He read from a neuropharmacology text that cost more than most cars. Symptoms often worsen with increased dosage, but improve rapidly with supervised withdrawal. How rapidly? Serena's voice carried the desperate hope of someone who'd been drowning for months and finally spotted a life preserver. Hours to days, depending on the specific compounds and duration of exposure. Liam looked up from the textbook, his expression grim with professional certainty. If someone were systematically medicating you with combinations designed to mimic neurological damage, the effects would be cumulative but reversible. The words hung in the library's silence like a death sentence for Alistair's carefully orchestrated deception. Serena felt 6 months of self-doubt and manufactured helplessness crystallizing into white-hot fury that burned away the last traces of pharmaceutical compliance. "I need proof," she said, her mind already working with the strategic precision that had built her empire. "Blood work, medication analysis, something that would hold up in court. The free clinic where I volunteer has basic analytical equipment," Liam offered, "not sophisticated enough for a full toxicology screen, but sufficient to identify common pharmaceutical compounds in your system." Serena's laptop emerged from beneath months of dust, her passwords returning to memory with startling clarity as she accessed financial records that painted a disturbing picture. Alistair's gambling debts stretched back 2 years, mounting losses that coincided perfectly with the timeline of her supposed decline. "He needed me incapacitated but not dead," she murmured, scrolling through bank transfers that revealed the scope of his desperation. Dead would trigger insurance investigations and estate complications, but legally incompetent would make him my guardian and effective CEO. Liam leaned forward to study the screen, his medical background helping him recognize the pattern. "The medication adjustments follow your board meeting schedule. Higher doses before important decisions, maintenance levels during quiet periods. And tonight? Tonight you skip the evening dose, which is why your mind is clearer than it's been in months. His voice carried the quiet satisfaction of a doctor solving a complex case. Whatever he's been giving you, the effects are temporary, with consistent administration. Serena's phone chimed with a text message that made her blood freeze. Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. Dr. Harrison recommends increased medication tonight to ensure stability for tomorrow's proceedings. The trap was closing faster than anticipated. 8 hours until she had to face 12 board members while fighting off whatever pharmaceutical cocktail Alistair planned to force into her system before dawn. "Can you test my blood tonight?" The question came out sharper than she intended, desperation bleeding through careful composure. "The clinic doesn't open until 6 a.m., and even then we make our own lab." Serena's wheelchair turned toward the mansion's wine cellar with sudden purpose. Sarah used to homebrew wine as a hobby. The equipment might be crude, but chemistry is chemistry. As they headed deeper into the mansion's basement, Alistair's footsteps echoed from the floor above, pacing with the restless energy of a predator whose prey had suddenly learned to fight back. By dawn, one of them would be proven right about what was destroying Serena Ward's mind, and the other would face consequences that money couldn't buy or silence couldn't hide. The wine cellar's makeshift laboratory smelled of fermentation and desperate hope as Liam adjusted the pH strips beneath the harsh fluorescent light Sarah had installed for her brewing hobby. 3 hours until the board meeting, and the blood sample floating in improvised solution was telling a story that made his stomach clench with professional rage. "Lorazepam, definitely," he murmured, comparing the color changes against reference charts pulled from medical websites. "Probably haloperidol, too, based on the neurological symptoms you described." Low doses administered consistently to avoid acute toxicity but maintain chronic impairment. Serena gripped her wheelchair's armrests as waves of clarity continued washing through her mind. 6 months of pharmaceutical fog lifting to reveal the scope of Alistair's manipulation. Every board meeting where she'd struggled to follow financial projections. Every family dinner where her words had come out slurred and confused. Every night she'd gone to bed wondering if the accident had stolen more than just her legs. How long would it take to clear my system completely? 48 to 72 hours for full cognitive recovery, but Serena, Liam's voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering bad news to family members. The board meeting is in 3 hours. Whatever you're planning, you'll still be fighting residual effects. The basement door creaked open above them, Alistair's expensive shoes clicking against stone steps with the measured pace of someone who'd finally decided to stop pretending. His silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by the mansion's ambient lighting in a way that made him look like a villain from Serena's childhood nightmares. "Fascinating hobby you've developed," he said, his voice carrying none of the false warmth that had characterized months of manipulation. "Though I think you'll find the results inconclusive." "Will I?" Serena's voice was steady, but Liam could see her hands trembling, not from medication this time, but from the kind of rage that had been building for months beneath layers of chemical suppression. "Or will I find exactly what we both know I'll find?" Alistair descended the stairs with predatory slowness, his phone glowing in his hand like a small weapon. "The board meeting has been moved again. 7 a.m. Dr. Harrison will be there to discuss your recent episodes. Paranoid delusions, accusations against family members, refusing prescribed medication, very concerning behavior for someone in your condition." The trap was springing shut with mechanical precision, 45 minutes earlier than expected, just enough time disruption to prevent them from gathering more evidence or preparing a coherent defense. Liam felt the familiar helplessness that had driven him from emergency medicine, watching someone's life hang in the balance, while systems designed to help became weapons in the wrong hands. "You won't get away with this," Serena said, but her voice carried less conviction than it had an hour earlier. The reality of facing 12 board members while fighting off pharmaceutical residue was settling into her bones like winter cold. "Get away with what? Caring for my sister-in-law during her tragic decline?" Alistair's smile was surgical in its precision. "The medical records are clear. Progressive neurological deterioration following spinal trauma. Dr. Harrison's documentation is quite thorough. Documentation can be falsified. By whom? A dishwasher with delusions of medical grandeur?" Alistair's attention shifted to Liam with the focused malice of a man who'd identified his primary obstacle. "Mr. O'Connell, your services are no longer required. I believe you'll find your payment reflects the understanding that discretion is expected." The envelope that appeared on the wine cellar's wooden table was thicker than the original, clearly more than the agreed-upon 2,000. Enough money to solve Liam's financial problems and ensure Finn's educational future. All he had to do was walk away from a woman whose life was being systematically destroyed by pharmaceutical manipulation. "Keep your money." The words came out before Liam could consider the financial implications, before he could think about rent payments and school fees and winter coats. "Some things aren't for sale." Alistair's expression shifted from calculated confidence to something approaching genuine concern. "That's unfortunate, because some things are more expensive than you might imagine." The photograph appeared on his phone screen like a physical blow. Finn walking out of school, backpack slung over his shoulder, completely unaware that someone was watching him with predatory interest. The timestamp showed yesterday afternoon, just hours after Liam had accepted the original escort assignment. "Beautiful boy," Alistair murmured, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that made Liam's vision narrow with parental terror. "So trusting. Amazing how many dangers exist in the city for children whose fathers make poor decisions." The threat hung in the cellar's stale air like poison gas, choking off every response Liam might have made. 6 years of struggling to provide for Finn, of working 3 jobs to keep them afloat, of building a safe life from the wreckage of his medical career, all of it balanced on the edge of a knife held by a man who'd spent months slowly murdering his sister-in-law. "Don't." Serena's voice cut through his paralysis, steady despite the pharmaceutical residue still clouding her system. "Don't sacrifice your son for me. I'm not worth destroying your family." But Liam was staring at the photograph, remembering Finn's excitement about the astronomy club, his dreams of studying the stars, his absolute faith that his father would always protect him from the kind of monsters that wore expensive suits and smiled while threatening children. "The board meeting is in 30 minutes, Alistair said, pocketing his phone with satisfied finality. "I suggest you both use that time to consider what's truly important." As his footsteps faded up the cellar stairs, Serena and Liam sat in the wreckage of their investigation, surrounded by evidence that might save her life, but couldn't protect the 8-year-old boy whose only crime was having a father brave enough to care about strangers. The wine cellar's silence stretched between them like a grave. And for the first time since Emma's death, Liam understood exactly how it felt to watch someone die while knowing he had the power to save them, and choosing not to. 20 minutes before the board meeting, Serena sat in her study staring at the laptop screen that held 6 months of financial evidence, while pharmaceutical clarity battled against the crushing weight of impossible choices. Liam paced beside her wheelchair, his phone clutched in white-knuckled fingers as he tried calling Finn's school for the 4th time in 10 minutes. "The office says he's in class," Liam said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "But they can't confirm if anyone else has tried to contact him today." Serena's mind was working with the strategic precision that had built her empire, cutting through emotional fog to focus on the patterns that might save them both. Alistair's mistake was threatening your son instead of just buying your silence. He's desperate, which means he's made other mistakes too. That doesn't help Finn if something happens. "Nothing's going to happen to Finn." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. "Because we're not going to let Alistair control this narrative anymore." Her fingers moved across the laptop keyboard with steady precision, muscle memory overriding months of medication-induced tremors as she pulled up files that painted a devastating picture of financial desperation and systematic fraud. Bank transfers that coincided with her supposed medical episodes, insurance claims for treatments she'd never received. Most damning of all, communications between Alistair and Dr. Harrison that revealed the scope of their collaboration. "The board thinks they're gathering to discuss my competency," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "But they're actually going to witness the unveiling of the largest corporate fraud in Ward Industries history." Liam stopped pacing, caught by something in her tone that reminded him why Serena Ward had been featured on Fortune's Most Powerful Women list before Alistair's campaign of chemical sabotage began. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Alistair has spent so much energy positioning me as incompetent that he's forgotten who I was before the accident." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. He's about to be reminded. The study door burst open with enough force to rattle the antique hinges, Alistair entering like a man whose careful plans were unraveling faster than he could adjust them. Dr. Harrison followed close behind, a nervous-looking man in his 60s whose expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat stains spreading beneath his arms. "The car is waiting," Alistair announced, his voice carrying forced authority undermined by the manic energy radiating from his movements. "Dr. Harrison has prepared a mild sedative to help with your anxiety before the meeting." "How thoughtful." Serena's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "Though I'm feeling remarkably clear-headed this morning, almost like myself again." Dr. Harrison stepped forward with a syringe that caught the morning light streaming through tall windows, liquid salvation that would solve all their problems with a single injection. "Just something to take the edge off. Board meetings can be stressful for someone in your condition." "My condition?" Serena's wheelchair moved with mechanical precision, positioning herself between the doctor and any easy approach. "Which condition would that be, Doctor?" "Harrison, the spinal injury that healed months ago or the pharmaceutical dependency you've been cultivating on my brother-in-law's behalf?" The words hit the room like explosive charges, shattering the careful facade that had protected their conspiracy for half a year. Dr. Harrison's hand shook slightly, the syringe wavering as professional ethics warred with financial necessity. "Serena, you're not thinking clearly," Alistair said, moving to flank her wheelchair from the other side. "The stress of preparation has triggered another episode. Dr. Harrison can help stabilize your—" "My thinking is perfectly clear." Serena's laptop screen faced them now, displaying bank records that made Dr. Harrison go pale beneath his expensive tan. "Clear enough to recognize systematic fraud when I see it. Clear enough to understand that my sister's husband has been slowly poisoning me while stealing from the company she helped me build." Liam felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched the two men exchange glances loaded with implications he didn't want to understand. Whatever they'd planned for this meeting, Serena's unexpected coherence had forced them into dangerous territory where improvisation might lead to permanent solutions. "The board is waiting," Dr. Harrison said, his voice carrying new urgency. "If we could just—" "The board can wait 5 more minutes." Serena's fingers danced across her keyboard with the fluid precision of someone whose mind was working at full capacity for the first time in months. "Long enough for me to send a little insurance to my personal attorney." The email attachment was already uploading. Financial records, medical documentation, communication logs that painted a picture of fraud so comprehensive that even Alistair's expensive lawyers would struggle to contain the damage. But Liam could see something shifting in Alistair's expression, calculation giving way to the kind of desperate fury that made dangerous men do irreversible things. "Stop typing!" The command came out sharp with unveiled threat. "Send that email and your friend's son faces consequences you can't imagine. Touch that boy and I'll destroy you." Liam stepped forward, medical training overridden by parental rage that had been building since he'd seen Finn's photograph on Alistair's phone. "I'll make sure every medical board in the country knows what you've done here." "With what evidence? The word of a dishwasher against established medical professionals?" Alistair's smile was winter cold. "Though perhaps none of this will matter if Serena has another episode before reaching the boardroom." Dr. Harrison was already moving, syringe raised with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd crossed ethical lines so many times that one more injection barely registered. But Serena's laptop chimed with confirmation that her email had uploaded successfully. Insurance policy delivered to lawyers who would ask uncomfortable questions if anything happened to her before the board meeting. "Too late," she said, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "The evidence is already in motion. Then we'll have to work with what we have." Alistair's tone carried new finality, the sound of someone who'd abandoned subtle manipulation for more direct solutions. "Dr. Harrison, I think Serena is experiencing acute psychosis. Immediate hospitalization may be necessary." The syringe moved towards Serena's arm with professional precision, but Liam's hand intercepted it with reflexes honed by years in emergency medicine. The struggle was brief but violent, pharmaceutical solution spraying across expensive carpet as two men fought over a woman's right to remain conscious during her own corporate execution. When the syringe shattered against the study's marble fireplace, Dr. Harrison staggered backward with blood streaming from his nose, while Liam stood protective beside Serena's wheelchair, every muscle coiled with the desperate energy of someone whose family had been threatened by monsters wearing medical degrees. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Serena said into the sudden silence, her voice steady despite the pharmaceutical residue still clouding her system. "Shall we go show them what a competent CEO looks like?" But as they prepared to leave for what might be the most important presentation of her life, Alistair's phone buzzed with an incoming call that made his face go ashen with something approaching terror. "Dr. Harrison," he said quietly, "I think we have a problem." The boardroom fell silent as Serena Ward's wheelchair glided through doors that had witnessed decades of corporate power struggles, but none quite like this. 12 directors sat around the polished table, their morning coffee growing cold as they absorbed the implications of what they'd just heard. Not the competency hearing they'd expected, but a presentation that had systematically dismantled 6 months of carefully constructed lies. The financial projections glowed on the wall screen, each number a nail in Alistair's corporate coffin. Fraudulent medical claims totaling $3 million, diverted research funds that had bankrolled his gambling debts. Most damning of all, recorded conversations between him and Dr. Harrison discussing dosage adjustments timed to coincide with critical business decisions. The pharmaceutical analysis confirms systematic poisoning designed to mimic neurological decline, Serena said, her voice carrying the steady authority that had once made her the youngest CEO in Ward Industries history. "Blood work shows compounds that have no legitimate medical application for my actual condition." Board Chairman William Chen leaned forward, his expression grim with the weight of fiduciary responsibility that had been betrayed by family trust. "And Mr. Thorne's current location?" "Federal custody as of 20 minutes ago," Serena replied, satisfaction cutting through the pharmaceutical fog that still clouded the edges of her consciousness. "The SEC was very interested in our documentation of corporate fraud. Dr. Harrison is providing additional testimony in exchange for reduced charges." Liam stood beside her wheelchair, no longer the invisible hired help, but the medical professional whose expertise had helped expose the conspiracy. His phone had finally stopped buzzing with panicked calls about Finn. The boy was safe at school. Alistair's threats revealed as the desperate bluffs of a man whose world was collapsing in real time. "The motion to remove Miss Ward as CEO is withdrawn," Chen announced, his words carrying relief mixed with professional embarrassment. "I believe we owe both Miss Ward and Mr. O'Connell substantial apologies for not recognizing the signs of systematic fraud occurring under our oversight." Serena's hand found Liam's wrist, her touch steady and warm without the trembling that had characterized months of chemical manipulation. "Mr. O'Connell's medical insight literally saved my life. I'd like to discuss establishing the Ward Foundation for Medical Ethics with him as chief consultant." The offer hung in the boardroom air like a bridge between two worlds, her corporate empire and his abandoned medical calling, connected now by shared experience of surviving something that should have destroyed them both. Liam felt the weight of possibility settling on his shoulders, different from the crushing burden of impossible choices that had defined his life since Emma's death. "I'd be honored," he said quietly, understanding that some second chances came disguised as other people's catastrophes. Outside the boardroom windows, Manhattan hummed with its usual relentless energy, 8 million people pursuing their own versions of survival and success. But in this room, two people who'd been forced together by manipulation had found something authentic in the wreckage of someone else's greed. For the first time in months, Serena Ward could trust her own mind. For the first time in years, Liam O'Connell could imagine practicing medicine without the weight of past failures crushing every decision. The woman in the wheelchair had saved herself. She just needed someone brave enough to hand her the tools. 1 year later, Finn's pencil scratched against graph paper as he mapped asteroid trajectories in the Ward Foundation's bright classroom. Liam watched from the doorway, remembering when they couldn't afford decent school supplies. "Dad, this one changes direction completely if you adjust the gravitational pull." Finn held up his notebook, tongue poking out in concentration. "Small adjustments can change everything," Liam said quietly. Serena appeared beside him, walking steady and strong after her congressional testimony. No wheelchair, no pharmaceutical fog, just the sharp-eyed woman who'd built an empire before someone tried to steal it with syringes and lies. "Unanimous vote," she said simply. "Medical manipulation is federal crime now." Finn looked up from his calculations. "So, no more bad medicine, people?" "Not if we can help it." Serena knelt to his level, her voice warm with hard-won peace. Through the windows, Manhattan hummed with 8 million stories of people fighting their own invisible battles. But here, 3 survivors had built something good from the wreckage of someone else's greed. Sometimes the cruelest traps become the doors to everything you never knew you needed.